Engagers, this is Professor Game, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who bring us the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration to help us in the process of using games and gamification in our daily lives, for example, to learn what we are teaching. And I am Rob Alvarez. I work at IronHack, teach at IE Business School University, and so much more, and host this podcast. If you have an extra second, please go ahead and subscribe for free to our email list at professorgame.com/subscribe. Engagers, welcome back to another episode of the Professor Game podcast. And we have with us today Charlotte. But Charlotte, we need to know before we take off, are you prepared to engage?
Yes, I am. Of course I am. Excited to be here.
Absolutely. Happy to have you. So Charlotte Cheng is the Senior Education Manager at CodeCombat. You might remember that we've had already Valentin recently. And also we were talking back to Bobby Lockhart as well, was one of the people that also works at CodeCombat. But she comes with an experience of over 20 years of curriculum design experience and has developed curriculum content for CodeCombat, Wonder Workshop, Walt Disney Company, LeapFrog, and several EdTech startups. And her expertise is creating effective and engaging content for kids at the intersection of education, media, and technology. And as, of course, part of her work at CodeCombat, she hosts and produces the EdTech Adventures podcast, which explores the role of technology, STEM, and creative play in education with expert guests. She has also taught a variety of K-12 classroom settings, and one of her workshops was featured on ABC News. She received her BS in Cognitive Science and MA in Elementary Education at Stanford University. Charlotte, I don't know if there's anything that we're missing from that intro that you want to make sure we get in before we ask the other questions.
Sure. I mean, I gave you that bio, but I realized I didn't share that I also write children's books, and that's been a recent, the more recent endeavor of mine, and I've got several books coming out. So I'll share the link with you if people want more information about that too. Amazing.
We'll definitely include that in the show notes. So Charlotte, we know you work at CodeCombat. We've heard what Valentin's day looks like. We've heard what Bobby Lockhart's day looks like. But I'm sure your day looks completely different from theirs, or at least partially. So we want to know, what does it feel like to be Charlotte in these days? Where does, writing children's book fit in, the EdTech Adventures podcast? Like, how do you fit all these things in a day or in a week, whatever you want to go for?
Happy to share. One phrase I like to share is that I am never bored in this role. Absolutely never bored. The role of education touches almost every aspect of our company, as it should, because our company believes in game-based learning, where we're using games to teach kids how to code, right? And so a lot of my day often is in meetings, but a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, meetings. For me, meetings are a really great opportunity to collaborate with different aspects of the company. So I have a team that I manage. We're called the Learning Design Team, and we divide and conquer a lot of different projects. And then I also meet with the leadership team. They head up different aspects of it, like marketing, sales, operations, engineering. And we talk about long-term goals and also short-term goals. Then I'm also collaborating with a lot of different teams on different projects. So like you said, the podcast, that's an internal team development where I interview a lot of different guests, but then we also work with the marketing team on how to market those episodes when they come out live. We're working on a brand new game partnership with Roblox, actually. So a lot of meetings also involve working with the game design team there. And that's where I hang out with Valentin and Bobby, who are a treat to work with. And there we really iterate. We can get into the nitty-gritty details about how exactly a level should go, all the way to the big picture ideas of like, hey, what will this game look like in 2 years? So you have that full span. And then I'm also supporting the sales team. So I love talking to teachers. I love working with students. And so with the sales team, I'm often in meetings having conversations with teachers, helping them figure out and problem shoot how to use our game in their classroom. And then we do play testing in schools too, to make sure our product and our curriculum is accessible and approachable for both the teachers and the students. So I get to do a little bit of everything basically every week.
Sounds like you, as you've mentioned, you don't get bored and you have so many things going on.
That's
all
right.
over, the company and with clients and everything in between. So that sounds pretty fantastic, to be honest.
Yeah. I really enjoy my job. And I know you asked about the children's book. projects. I do that on the side. I like to say it's my side hustle. And I love our culture here at CodeCombat, where leadership really supports people having side hustles, pursuing alternate passions of theirs, because it feeds into your full-time work too. So when I write my children's books, I'm also thinking through the eyes of a kid. I'm thinking through stories, and all of that plays into how we design the games. A lot of our games involve storytelling, involve character development. And so it's really interesting to see how each one of us brings a different perspective outside of the work we do at CodeCombat. But one of them, like literally at All Hands today, we sometimes do something called Teach Me Something New. And people in the company take turns teaching a new concept or a skill to the rest of the company. And so one of our coworkers, she leads our online classes. She was teaching us yoga stretches for the eyes. So something as basic as that informs how it helps the whole company feel better about eye tension. And so I love how our company is really like a community that really collaborates and gives back to each other.
That sounds amazing. Yoga for the eyes.
I know. I didn't even think about that. But my eyes, after we did it, I felt like I went to a spa. Right. And so you don't realize that, hey, this is something important for our company's 100% remote. We're on the computers all the time. So it's so great that like one of our team members can share that expertise with us to make all of our lives better.
It sounds like it for sure. Making lives better is definitely a big one right there. So after hearing, how amazing your job is and how amazing it is to work in the company you're working and, being able to have your side hustle as well, we actually want to go into a little bit more of the dark times, right? So one of those times when you were, you work at CodeCombat, so game-based learning is your day-to-day. One of those times when using games and learning didn't go quite right? So things you were going north, things went south. We want to know what happened there. We want to be there with you again. If you don't want to name any names or any super specifics, it's fine, because we want to take more of the lessons. We want to be there in that experience more than anything with you. And now a storyteller and a book writer, so definitely into it.
I'm happy to share one. So when I joined the company, the first day of my job was actually the first week that our nation went into worldwide shutdown. So I'd only been in the office for the interview. And since then, it's been 100% remote. And so part of the challenge was just figuring out how to work together online, like 100% of the time. And our team, when we were working on another game called Azaria and really building that out, our teams had 4 different time zones. So it was often a struggle to find a time where we could all meet together and people being fully awake. And so that was a bit of a struggle. And then the other thing that happened was I joined halfway through the game development. So we have 4 chapters and they had already developed about 2+ chapters of it. And we were looking at building out the rest. But one difficult thing for me was when I joined, I played through what had already been built. And I had some pretty strong feedback and suggestions. And we went, oh no, this is like major revision work. But what we did was we were very data driven. So we went and looked at the data about like playthroughs of the content we had already built and published. And it was very clear that there were things that really needed to be fixed. And it's really hard. Like, I know a lot of people think, oh, when you design a game, you just start from scratch. But our games are constantly living and iterating. We're almost 10 years old. And so one of the hardest things is to take a game you've already built and to improve it, because you're now trying to thread the needle through things that you've already built. You're threading the needle through people who are still playing your game. Right. So you have to find a way to really revise it in a gentle way so that people don't abruptly run into new content. And so it was almost felt like surgery. We had to like take apart some of the content and put it back together again. But I'm really proud of what we did, because we ended up being one of like the top 6 rated activities for Hour of Code for code.org, which is what was a new record for us. So all that hard work was worth it, but boy, was it really messy in the in-between, right? Trying to figure out, oh no, like, do we have to rewrite this? What part should we keep? If we are to revise, how's this going to affect the current players? All of these big questions came up, but I'm really glad we got to do it together as a team.
So going through those hard times, is there any particular experience that you remember as like, oh, this was really tough, and eventually we figured something out, but maybe, I don't know, maybe you would have approached it initially different because once you knew what you didn't know, you would say, well, now I have a lesson learned. I would do this other way. Is there any, when I say that, does anything come to your mind?
Yeah, I think we tried to do as much playtesting as we could. Granted, it was a pandemic, so the only way we were able to do it was virtually. So we would schedule Zoom sessions with kids and have them share their screen and play through some of our content just to check in on it. And I'm going to own up to it. We did that revision round. We did all that. And we just did another revision round last year. Just because when we did playtesting, we just focused on a couple levels, but we didn't really have time to get a kid to play through the whole course and really see the pacing there. Because then what we realized, like, okay, if they do a couple levels in a row, that's fine. But if we linked all the levels together, sometimes it was too much content, which usually, in a game design, you're like, oh, I want to make sure they have this many hours of gameplay, right? But if you have too much content and it's too much the same, or it jumps in challenge level around too much, and a kid gets frustrated, they're going to abandon the game and not complete it. So that's something that I wish and all the game developers are going to say this, you never have enough time because you're always trying to deliver something. But I am always going to say, I want to carve out more playtesting time because you learn so much from just watching kids play your game about what's working, what's not working. So with this Roblox game we're developing, we're starting early. So like we've already done some rounds of testing. We're trying to open up an alpha group. And so hopefully that's going to give us a lot more insight as we're creating the game.
Amazing. Making sure that you have enough playtesting is always a difficult one. When I'm talking to my students about this, there's always a question of, how much playtesting is good enough or is too much? And do you have an answer to a question like that one?
Oh, it's pretty tough. We were just talking about this. So to me, it's about timing. There's different kinds of playtesting to do at different stages of your game development. So right now we're on the earlier side. So we need to do a lot of one-on-one testing because we sort of have to hand wave things. We have to say, don't worry about this art. It's not the final. Don't look at this thing here. We just really want you to focus at this part of the game. And we like to call them think alouds because we want to watch them play. And once in a while ask hey, I'm noticing you pause. What are you thinking about? Or I saw that you paused here. What do you think you're supposed to do next? And so that kind of stuff is very intensive. And I get you. It takes a lot of time and effort. Oftentimes it's two people have to go because one person's moderating and the other person is writing notes. So it's a lot of time, a lot of effort, but it's worth it because at that stage of the game, you still have the luxury of making huge shifts in the paradigm of how you design your game. So some of the stuff that we took away from them, it's completely shift our schedule a little bit or what we want to prioritize. So that piece is you don't need a lot of people because that's just not practical. But what I would say is we're really trying to keep an eye on variety. So even if it's just a handful in the early stages, make sure you have a variety of voices in there. So people from different socioeconomic levels, different gender identities, things like that, so that you're not also skewing your feedback. I tested just 4 boys, right? That's a not very diverse group to test off of. Then the next round is we're doing an alpha. So that's a closed loop alpha where you are hands off. That's just you're handing the game to a far larger pool of people and then having them play completely unguided and then have them give feedback. And so literally the meeting today was a question of, are we ready yet? Because if we ship an alpha where it's not obvious of how to navigate, everyone's feedback is going to be I did not enjoy the game and therefore I don't have very constructive feedback for you. I was just too frustrating to play, so I quit. So there's a timing aspect to it. So you want to sort of build to these milestones and go, this is a great time to get feedback. And this is the kind of feedback I want to get. Either it's in-person one-on-one with think alouds or I'm ready for an alpha group where a lot of people can be playing my game and I can just give them a form to fill out at the end and get feedback that way. Hope that helps. That was a long-winded answer.
No, it was actually pretty good one, pretty detailed as well. And after, failures and, many successes, as we know from CodeCombat as well, I'm sure you've gained a lot of experience and you sort of have a way of doing things. And we've kind of discussed this with Bobby, kind of discussed this as well with Valentin, but do you have some form of process for your part of what you're doing, your participation in CodeCombat? How do you structure things? That you have to either introduce a feature or create something from scratch. How does that look like? We sort of want to pick into your brain and see what we can get from that.
So I like to practice what I preach. So a lot of our curriculum is around this concept of the design thinking process. I don't know if you've heard of that before.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we teach it to our students, but we also practice it when we're developing our product, right? So one of the first things, I'm going to go back to playtesting again. One of the first stages of design thinking is understanding or empathizing with your audience. And part of that process is identifying your audience. I still sometimes have to keep reminding our group, or we have to always remind ourselves, wait, who are we making this game for again? And being as specific as possible really helps you make a lot of decisions down the line. So really identifying that piece. And then at the other pieces of it is truly defining. We spend a lot of time defining what we want to build before we actually build it, because it's not as it doesn't cost as much to be sketching things out on a piece of paper or like fleshing something out on a quick like SketchUp, right? But if we are making those decisions down the line when we've already built a lot of things, it's going to be really expensive for us to change. So really building a proper plan. Then after we have that plan, to really build a really rough prototype, because that prototype lets us, again, get this in front of playtesters as early as possible to get some feedback so that we can then do that loop all over again. We circle back and say, hey, we got that feedback. Why did we get that feedback? Let's remind ourselves, who are we making this game for? And based on that feedback, let's make a plan. What do we want to change? What do we want to add? And let's build the next prototype. So that quick iterative thinking, to me, really helps you stay focused. And it also helps remind you who you're building this for and why everyone's in the room. And it really helps also resolve a lot of arguments, because at the end of the day, everybody in our team, we care about the game we make because of the impact it will make on kids. So when we're having like disagreements, it's guaranteed you're going to have disagreements. It's always good to circle back to the audience of why we're doing it. And that whole design thinking process really helps guide that conversation.
Always getting back to actually the people that you're creating for, I guess, is sort of the bottom line here. If we had to say something, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Amazing. So thanks again for all that insights, all that, look into your brain, into your process, for sure.
Just a quick break before we continue. Are you enjoying this podcast? If you're listening through a podcasting app, please subscribe and rate us on the app. This will be of great help to reach more engagers so we can change the world together through gamification.
And Charlotte, if I were to ask you something like, what is a best practice when using games for learning? What comes to your mind? I'm not talking silver bullet, just something that, if you do this, or you think about it this way, or you use this strategy, it would at least improve the way that you create these things and the final result that you get.
Oh, that's so tough. There's just, I can only pick one advice. Oh man, it's such a broad category. I think more closely, and I warned you I was going to talk about Stardew Valley, and I'm going to talk about it because it's fresh on my mind. My husband and I have been playing Stardew Valley like nonstop every night. And one of the drivers for me is the developers there spend so much time on story. The characters are really fleshed out, not just your own character, but also the people you interact with in the town. And you build relationships with them. You find out about their weaknesses and strengths. And that really has driven me to really continue playing and continuing to iterate. And my advice is to don't forget about the story, even when it comes to education, because we often are so obsessed about the learning objectives, which are very important, and the game mechanic itself. But having story is going to immerse your player into that experience. It's going to help them want to invest that time in playing it. And it gets them excited. I mean, it's to the point where people laugh at me because I talk about Stardew Valley characters as if they were my good friends. Like, I've been in shops where I see a thing and I'm like, oh, Leah would like that. And my husband looks at me and goes, who's Leah? And I went, from Stardew Valley. And he just rolls his eyes. But if you effectively, truly put story like that, like, kids will get obsessed about the game in a great way because they'll keep iterating, they'll keep playing, and they'll keep learning, sometimes not even realizing that they are because they're so immersed into the story.
That sounds amazing. Definitely something to take into consideration, Charlotte. And keeping up with these recommendations, what would you say is a person, as we've mentioned several times, there are several colleagues from CodeCombat that we've interviewed. But if I told you, like, who would you have on the podcast, on this podcast, on Professor Game, hearing these questions, who would make you curious to listen to?
Curious as in like, oh, someone that I feel would be really fun to get advice from.
Yeah.
Oh, there's just so many great ones. You mentioned that I also host a podcast. So I just got to list some people from the people I've interviewed, because usually they're guests where I have a conversation with them. We try and cap it to an hour. And at the end of the hour, I go, oh my gosh, we could have talked for more hours and learned so much more. So some of the ones I've really enjoyed are Kiki Protzman. I would look into her. So she really was on the early side of code.org when they were developing games and developing how kids could learn how to code by themselves online. And she just really transformed the space and set up like a really great foundation for a lot of the people who are now in this space. So she's really great. Kevin Carrington, he's doing some amazing stuff with like live coding STEM experience, where he's building things like he'll build the world of Wakanda so that underserved communities are excited to go and learn how to code and work together. I could go on and on. But another one was Laura Nelson. So she used to work for the NSA and now is a part of the Cryptological Foundation, who's really trying to drive cyber safety awareness for kids. They're developing games where kids experience what it's like to get hacked, or what it's like if like a bad actor is trying to get your information, so they can actually practice how to react when someone's trying to hack into your system, if someone's trying to scam you. So there's just like such a broad like space for you to use games to teach concepts, right? And so I just like variety. I think variety is great because people bring their own perspective and it helps us diversify this whole space even more.
Amazing. Great recommendations. I'm sure I think I haven't heard from any of those. So that is actually a very, very good thing.
Yeah, no, definitely check them out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And about a book, is there and here, with the guests, it's great to have many, but if I told you have to recommend a book, what book would you recommend and why that book to this audience, of course?
Oh my gosh, this is so hard. Speaking of Kiki Protzman, I really recommend this called Computational Thinking and Coding for Every Student. She wrote it with a colleague of hers called Jane Krause. And I love this book because the book itself has activities for you to do so you can experience the different aspects of computational thinking and really understand that, hey, that is like the fundamental like building blocks for problem solving. And that can be applied to any subject that you're trying to teach. And so I recommend reading that because she writes it through the lens for a teacher and an educator. So you can sort of get a lot of great ideas about how to embed those skills into any subject you're trying to teach.
Very good. Very good. I haven't read that book, even though I'm a software engineer. So probably it's something that I should have read at some point, but I haven't. It sounds very, very interesting as a book. Definitely. Definitely. And we've talked about others and what things you would recommend from them. What would you say is your superpower in this space of games and learning?
Sure. More and more, I've realized my superpower is empathy and communication. I believe they go hand in hand, empathy and communication. And empathy is a muscle that you have to exercise and work out every day. I don't think enough people understand that. And so for me, empathy really helps me when I'm developing an experience or content. It helps me like look at it through the eyes of a student, look at it through the eyes of a parent, look at it through the eyes of a teacher, because each of those individuals has a different goal or objective in mind when they're looking at a game and evaluating if they want to play it. And we have to meet all of those, right? It's like I keep saying threading the needle. We are threading the needle so that all three of those types of people are satisfied. And more, we're also, we're talking about inclusion and representation, where it's not just one type of student or one type of parent or one type of teacher. We need more and more need to acknowledge that there's a wide variety of students, a wide variety of teachers, and a wide variety of parents. And so how do we accommodate for all of those needs? And more, we are building out menus of content, menus of experiences, because we've realized, so in CodeCombat, we start off with one game. Now we have 3 game experiences, and now we're adding a 4th because we realize every gamer has a different type of game style, right? And so we want to offer voice and choice for the students to pick the kind that they like. Azaria, that which I'd mentioned, is more story based. It's you're a hero. There's like a storyline where there's cliffhangers, etc. You're saving the world with the power of code. Our original game, CodeCombat, is more like Zelda, like a dungeon crawler. AI Sports League, that's competitive coding. So like PvP style play. And then Roblox is a truly like immersive MMO experience. So what we've learned is that, hey, like having that empathy makes you realize how much voice and choice you want to give to your audience and what are the choices you want to offer? What are the voices you want to offer? So I would say that's my superpower. And I keep growing that. I keep practicing it, exercising it. So talk to me in 10 years because I'll probably have learned even more.
Amazing. I'm very hopeful that we'll be around by that time, and you can call me back and say, look, let's talk. This is a 10-year comeback.
It's a date. Yeah, let's set it. Well, I'll check in with you in 10 years.
Let's do it. So, we do have time. Every now and then we get some questions from the audience, and we do a random selection. So as you know, Charlotte, and the audience knows as well, you don't know what the question is going to be until it comes up during the interview. And I'm stalling just to make sure that the system gives me a question from the ones that I pre-selected to make sure it makes sense for you. And this is a pretty good one, I would say. Like, this person is asking, what do you think is the most difficult thing about using games in learning?
Oh, that's so tough. I mean, there's a reason why we have a team because it's all about balance. It's so hard. Well, I'm coming from an education background. So for me, a big priority is making sure kids don't feel stuck, right? They don't feel like they want to abandon the game. So I want to do a lot of hand holdings. Like, let's give them lots of hints and messages and guide, like tutorials and things like that. But then if you do too much of that, too much hand holding, then it feels forced, right? And so we have game designers on our team who sort of help remind me, like, Charlotte, that's a lot of hand holding. And we've got to free it up a little bit more and allow the kids to explore and stumble and make mistakes, which is also a great strength, right? You're learning from your mistakes. And so it's just like a reminder of all of these different aspects of how to balance it all so that at the end of the day, it's a game that they're truly enjoying and that the learning objectives match well to it and it doesn't feel forced. So all of those, it's just, again, I'm going to use the metaphor, it's threading the needle. So to me, that's the toughest part.
So making sure that you have sort of the right team and the different people to give you all these perspectives would be probably a hard thing to achieve. And that's how to solve for that difficulty that you have. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it is. Like, it's so important to not to find people that don't have egos in the room. I mean, there's going to be some ego, but everyone in the room needs to have sort of a shared agreement that, hey, when it comes to decision making, we need to put ego aside. You get really precious about your ideas, but we have to set the ego aside and own up to the fact that, hey, that my idea is probably not the best idea. And it's really good to collaborate with a team because people remind you. Everyone has their blind spots when they're designing, so it's been really helpful. And so it's very lively. All of our game design meetings are extremely lively.
Amazing. Thank you for that. And the difficult question of the podcast, especially for you, comes in now. However, you've mentioned some of this, so maybe it comes in natural. What would you say is your favorite game?
Oh no. Oh, this is so hard. Is it a video game or just any game?
It's up to you. You can say, well, I'm going to choose from video games, which is my favorite video game, or my favorite game from childhood, or I don't know. It's up to you. However you want to phrase it, it's entirely up to you. I'm going to give you that's
okay. You're giving me some freedom. I really appreciate that. Thank you. I'm going to break the rule already and list a couple games because I just have to. So one I've loved. It's called Takedo. It's a board game, and it is oftentimes when you think about a game, it's usually combative, it's very tense. Takedo is the opposite of that. The sole goal of Takedo is to have the best vacation ever in ancient Japan. And you're traveling through, going to hot springs, buying souvenirs. It is such an easy game to learn because all of the mechanics make total sense. So a lot of times these days I have to first introduce the game and explain the rules. That is one of the easiest games for me to explain because things just seem very natural. And then the other category I've been really loving is co-op. So Pandemic. Unfortunately, we had a pandemic, but the game itself is really great. It
did come in before the pandemic.
Yeah, it did. It had a long life. And what happened was recently they did something called Pandemic Legacy, which is just eye-opening because in Legacy, you're playing rounds of games, and every game you do, it can unlock new story items, new abilities. There are times where you have to rip up cards and put stickers on the board itself. So
that's heartbreaking for me. I was telling Matt when he came on the interview that breaking apart a game is like I'm not sure I'll be capable of doing that.
Yeah, it was really okay. I'm not gonna lie. So in the beginning, we sort of didn't tear the card. We just sort of put it in a secret section. Because it felt bad to tear the card. But near the end, we were doing it because we realized, this really forces us to shift our thinking into the new strategies. But it was just this idea of like how the board could evolve with you. The characters you play could evolve with you. And then for video games, you heard me talk about Stardew for forever. Another really great one was Little Big Planet. It's an oldie, but to me, it's still a goodie. I was talking to a middle school student who still plays it. So I'm like, yeah, such a beautiful art style, such a great way to encourage people to fail forward because their save points are so short that you can just, you're like, I'm really just going to tackle this segment of the platformer. And so I thought that was really great. And then the other one is Okami, which is an also old game, but it was like a Japanese calligraphy meets video game combat. So you're like painting with a brush in order to combat and cast spells against different enemies. And the art style is all like calligraphy style. And I love it when they evolve like the perspective of a game using the design and the way that you're interacting with people in the game. So that's just a short list. I could go on.
I'm sure you could. I kind of cheat on this one and probably this is going to bite me back because I've said this before. I always ask this question, but I'm not answering it on the podcast.
Yeah.
So eventually I'll have to make up my mind as well, right?
You do. You really I like, top 10 at least, right? Because they're just like different genres. Like, how do you pick a genre? Like, anyway. Yeah.
Another podcaster was a good friend, Dustin. He kind of shifted his career. He was doing more in sort of game-based learning and so on. He now has a board game store. But he used to have in his podcast, if you were on a stranded island, right, which 3 board games, his was about board games in particular, which 3 board games would you take to be able to play there for, the years ahead of you. So that kind of gave you a top 3. So you kind of could get into that one as well.
Yes. Yeah. I'm already visualizing which 3 it would be.
There you go. Yeah. There you go.
Yeah.
Anyways, Charlotte, thank you. Like, we're arriving at the end. Thank you very much for investing your time. We had a pre-interview chat as well, which was lovely. I'm happy to have had you. Lots of insights. However, as the listeners know, we try to limit the amount of time we do on these episodes. So it's time to say goodbye. But of course, before we do that, is there any, final quick word you want to say? Please let us know where we can find out more about you, your work, or anything, anywhere you want to lead us. And then we'll say that it's game over.
Right. Sure. Check out our game. So you can go to CodeCombat.com and check out all of our different coding experiences. If you want to be on our alpha group for Roblox, it's CodeCombat.com/Roblox. And we're going to be launching our alpha group soon. And then if you want to see more of my children's book work, it's charlotte.art. And I'm giving you multiple links again. And then for the podcast, it's CodeCombat.com/podcast to check out the interviews there.
Amazing. Tons of interesting stuff. Plenty of good things to continue to research on the side of Charlotte. However, engagers, as you know, by now, and at least for today, it is time to say that it's game over.
Hey, engagers, thank you for listening to Professor Game Podcast. And if you want more interviews with incredible guests like Charlotte, please go to professorgame.com/subscribe and get started on our email list for free. No cost at all. That way, we'll be in contact. You'll be the first to know of all the opportunities that Professor Game will have for you. And remember, before you go on to your next mission, before you move on and click continue, remember to subscribe or follow, whatever that looks like, on your favorite podcast app for free. And then listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there.